few minutes for, we'll give a few minutes for people to trickle in. I just want to make sure that we get the audience.
That's good news because I thought I was the laggard.
Yeah.
And that I would be the technical problem.
No, you're good, Frank. Don't worry.
You're going to be okay. We are all inclusive here, Frank.
That's right.
We practice what we preach. Okay, so lots of people are coming in, and it's also a very exciting panel. And I know that we're going to be introduced to some very, very latest research that you're going to share with us. All right, as we see the numbers tick up, we now are going to talk about hiring and recruitment and how technology could bring equity and diversity into the process. And to do that, we have an incredible panel. And I want to introduce Arthur Woods, who is also a friend of the program at NYU. And he is here with his partners, Marcella and Frank. Arthur, take it away.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you so much for having us all. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share so you can see my slides. So as Anna mentioned, I am Arthur Woods, one of the co-founders here at a company called Mathison. And we focus on building technology that helps organizations achieve their diversity hiring goals. So we've led research in the space on equitable hiring to help really achieve this great goal that I know so many people have right now of building representation in the workforce, ensuring that underrepresented job seekers have a seat at the table. And we had a chance to partner with LATINSIGHTS to lead a study that I'll let Marcella and Frank tell you a little bit about, realizing that today so many employers are focused on how they achieve greater diversity in their workforce, but actually don't have the perspectives of the very underrepresented job seekers that they hope to hire. So we teamed up and we started to really, first of all, think about how we look at all marginalized and vulnerable communities. Today, there's such a oftentimes narrow definition of what we mean by diversity based on only what you can see in terms of gender and ethnicity, that we aren't accounting for people with disabilities, the neurodiverse community, refugees, and immigrants. So a lot of our work really speaks to how to lift vulnerable and marginalized communities that oftentimes aren't even included in the goals and diversity agenda for employers. But this is all what really spawned us to work with LATINSIGHTS to actually develop the very first diversity hiring report. And so Marcella, I'll let you talk a little bit about the mechanics of this report and how this came to be.
Thank you so much. So thanks so much to NYU, Anna, and your team. About a year ago, we were talking with Arthur. We were working with some of our clients, and we thought, we not only work on the space of diversity and inclusion, but we're passionate about it. And we started talking about what can we do to really accelerate and bring change into the space. And one of the things that we discussed, the need of more actual information, data, through the development of the right tools. So that's when we decided that we needed to really bring actual data into the process to really be able to drive change. And we decided to launch this study in 2021. And this is the first diversity hiring report. We're planning on doing it every year. And the main idea is that we strongly believe that there is a difference between knowing and guessing. And a lot of companies are guessing, and we see it a lot in our work that leadership thinks that everything is wonderful. They have a very diverse environment, but employees think in different ways. And everything obviously starts within the hiring process. So that's why we conducted nearly 500 interviews, 497 to be more precise, among underrepresented job seekers who were looking for a job within the last 12 months. And the main idea was to ascertain their opinions about the process. And we touch on a lot of different issues, from biases, how they feel about the process per se, what can be improved, and many other interesting topics that would be crucial to really create and accelerate change, which is ultimately the goal that we all have to help underrepresented communities in this space. And the study was conducted between the 20th and 25th of January of this year. So it's very, very fresh data that we're going to be sharing today.
Very top of mind. And you all are the first folks to actually see this data. So we will be unveiling the full report at a session we do together on June 23rd, which everyone is invited to, but we wanted to give everyone here a sneak peek of some of these insights. So NYU is making this possible to share early access to some of these insights. And I want to just really give a special thank you to Marcella and to Frank for their partnership on this. It's really been such a collaborative effort. It would not be possible without all the great work that LatinInsights does. LatinInsights actually helps many employers and governments glean this kind of learning and data in terms of communities. So very excited to have their partnership. So the first thing that we learned in this effort, is probably no surprise, is that when we talk to underrepresented job seekers, diversity efforts are crucial, but not visible to them for the vast majority of employers that they're working with. So we learned that 81% of underrepresented job seekers believe it's very important for employers to invest in diversity. But in only 6% of the case, does an underrepresented job seeker have a clear idea of an employer's diversity goals. So this is a really staggering gap that we saw just in terms of making it transparent, what you're working on. We also found that the vast majority of job seekers see diversity as a disadvantage when they're applying to jobs. Despite all of the great rhetoric that's happened in the last year around the priority of diversity and how many employers are clearly trying to invest in diversity, the vast majority of job seekers found that they still see diversity as a potential hindrance in their work. So only 1 in 4 underrepresented job seekers, specifically 26%, see that being from an underrepresented community is actually an advantage. So what can we do about this? Immediately, ideas for action that Marcella, Frank, and the team and I have is to focus on making diversity efforts a priority, make that authentic. So many employers today are putting up, talent branded pages with a stock photo of different communities. And job seekers see that and see that it's not always very authentic. We also have to really think about how we make this inclusive communication on our priority for diversity pervasive to our hiring process, not only in what we post on our sites, but in the experience we create for job seekers, in the interactions we have, in the way that we communicate. So Frank, I'll pass it over to you to talk about the bias that is being faced.
Yeah, let me say that Marcella and I, and Arthur too, have been in this game for an awful long time. And I think this is the first time that anyone, at least as far as we know, has looked at this whole issue from the job seeker perspective. So it was quite revealing to us and surprising in many respects to discover the views of diverse job seekers. And the conclusion, as this slide indicates, is that they continue to face significant bias in the hiring process. And while the hiring process begins with the job announcement, and they found bias in job postings, for example, the language that is used, and all the way through to application interviews, and so on. 62% of underrepresented candidates still experience bias in the hiring. Sorry, we have a typo.
Oh, yes.
In the interview process, for example, we found that they had interviews with not very diverse panels of interviewers. That a panel of all white males, for example, and excuse me, 4 in 5 underrepresented job seekers, 76%, have observed a lack of diversity in those panels, and 67% reported completing an interview and never receiving feedback. So they're already being discouraged from continuing in the hiring process as they go through these steps. So The conclusion is that you need to assess your entire hiring process for potential bias by walking through the experience of the candidate. Where is there room to build consistency and improve accessibility? And in our discussions with various people, we've found that a lot of them don't even consider this whole process that an applicant goes through. They tend to rely on numbers, internal numbers, for example, and to base hiring strategies on the needs to fill certain gaps, rather than going through the experience of the actual job seeker.
And Frank, I think that's such a critical point, because oftentimes we're seeing a posturing on behalf of many employers to say we just need to go source diverse candidates, right? Without acknowledging, to your point, Frank, the fact that we have to look at the experience we create for candidates, where they'll drop out of our process, how they'll actually feel when they're walking into a process. And many, knowing that many see diversity as a disadvantage, they're hypersensitive to the fact that an exclusionary experience could really be a deterrent. So I think your points around being holistic and systemic in this work really, really resonate. So Marcella, I'll hand it over to you in terms of some of the insights on pay equity here.
Thank you so much. As you all know, everybody that has ever been looking for a job, knowing what your salary is going to be is crucial. We find out through our research that this segment, underrepresented job seekers, feel like really there is not transparency and not clarity when it comes to pay equity. And oftentimes we find from leadership, which is very interesting, they always ask us, well, why is it we cannot have a more diverse workforce? Why is it we cannot find those diverse employees to be part of our company? And throughout the research, we see consistently the theme of biases, but also the lack of transparency, which is very important. So we see that 3 out of 5 underrepresented job seekers feel like their salary range, once it is disclosed, is below their expectation. This is very critical, because people go with an expectation and then it's not being fulfilled. So it will be much easier for everybody if things were clear from the beginning. And only 8% feel, satisfied with the final offer. So that's an important point. The other issue is that we ask them whether or not within their experience at different jobs that they have held in the past, whether they feel that they had enough mentorship or a sponsorship in their new jobs. And we find out that the vast majority said that that wasn't the case. Only 22%, 1 in 5, feel that they say they had been connected to a program, sponsorship program, mentorship program, or any sort of help that will assure that they can advance their career. And we see it in many studies that we have done with women and many other minorities that feel this way. So we hire you and then we leave you there, but we don't provide you with the actual support that you need. So it's very important that leadership listens to all these concerns, and not only listen, but they take the right and appropriate action to create change. And we have seen, on the other side, on a positive note, we have seen how when leadership has the decision to really create change, how easy it is for them to do it. So when we look at what are the insights to action, what are the main takeaways, is obviously you need to be more transparent throughout your entire process, particularly when it comes to pay ranges, at least perhaps not saying this is going to be your salary, but this is the range that you're going to get. And also it's very important that they have in place the right mentorship and the right help for the new hires, and it has to be according to the needs of each and every one. It cannot be, in our view, something that is general and we throw the same thing for everybody. Every candidate, every job seeker, every employee has a different need, and it has to be addressed.
Mm. And I think this is so key because it's so easy for us to think that, especially around the transparency of the pay, that you know, we'll just figure that out later. We're finding that the earlier you sequence that, the better. I think your point about mentorship, Marcelo, the fact that setting folks up to really advance, this is a piece that we see consistently with such a hyper focus on hiring, missing the fact that if we're not building inclusive cultures that set people up to actually stay and feel supported, our hiring basically isn't sustainable, you know? So with all of this, you know, a few trends that Marcella, Frank, and I also really sort of pick up on and glean from all of this work. One is that when we think about who's responsible for driving this change forward, we have to really think about the fact that this goes beyond HR. You know, while we have historically thought of all of our diversity and inclusion efforts as being HR-led and diversity leader-led, we're seeing a major trend to democratizing responsibility of this work. We think of all of the stakeholders in our organizations, from hiring managers to frontline team members who conduct interviews. They all influence everything we just discussed in this study. So employers that we find are really making strides in this work are starting to think about how they activate their whole teams around this work. And we think about every single touch point, truly, you know, each hiring manager, each person conducting interviews. Every single person not only plays a role in potentially bringing bias and inconsistency to our process, but we think also of the collective reach of our organizations when it comes to referring in candidates from different marginalized communities. And it's very powerful to start thinking of how we engage everyone. The second piece of this really is that we, as Frank was mentioning earlier, as Marcelo also alluded, we have to think of all of this in a systemic way. So many employers right now are hyper-focused on single pieces of their efforts and not thinking about the fact that every single touch point of our talent life cycles, every single step along the way in our hiring process influences the way that a candidate feels, but also the extent to which we are successfully advancing people in our process. So the three things we really think about, Marcel and Frank and I will continue to speak about because of this research, are that we have to continuously think about how we're shifting our systems to be more equitable, how we're reaching new communities, and how we're really engaging every person in our organization in this process. And this is a big philosophical shift for employers. This diversity, equity, inclusion work isn't short-term. It is long-term, it's systemic, and it has to really engage everyone. And the organizations we find that are making that philosophical shift are the ones that are actually seeing a lot of great results right now. So we are going to be sharing much more in terms of any interest in Mathison. You can learn a little bit more about tools that we've created and technology we've created to support diversity hiring at Mathison.io. And I also want to give a huge shout out to LATINSIGHTS and Marcel and Frank. Tell us a bit more about some of the ways that you all are working with employers and how folks can learn a little more about your research.
Thank you so much, Arthur. And well, one of the things that we're doing, we really believe in the need to use digital tools, technology to bring awareness to companies. So everything we do, we start with an assessment process where we work with a company, we try to understand really for each particular company, what are the issues that they are facing, but also to understand from the point of view of leadership and mid-management and their employees, how do they perceive all these different issues? What are the things that they are facing and what can we do? What would they like to be done to really overcome these issues? So we believe that only through data-driven information, we can create real change. And we have the fortune to have seen this in action, where we have worked with companies that were really committed and they were able to drive significant change. So we create dashboards for our clients, and they can see their progress and they can see how different actions that they are taking can create different impact within the organization. And we see what is working, what is not working, what it has to be improved. But I think it's very important to have very clear goals.
That's amazing. Well, again, that the research would not have been possible without all of your guys' great work. So I know that we want to switch gears to questions, and we have a couple that have already come in. So please write in your questions. Jenna had a question. Oh,
Can I
yes,
jump
hey,
in
Anna,
with,
please.
with
Yes, yes.
one question?
Yeah.
Regarding recruiting from Gina Wittenberg here, about implicit bias. There's a lot of conversation about right now and a lot of research around implicit bias. How do you deal with it? What are the assessments or measurements, and how do you accelerate inclusion by eliminating or at least shining some light on implicit bias?
Yes, Jenna, great, and Anna, thank you for asking that. It's a great question, and I'd love for Marcel and Frank to weigh in too. We see this kind of at two levels. The first is there certainly are some great psychometric tests, some of which have been developed by Harvard that can help you identify where you have implicit bias and do not. There are some free tools out there that help individuals understand that, and we believe that's really important at an individual level to do that self-awareness and that self-discovery. We are looking at implicit bias from a systemic level in terms of how it shows up in our talent processes, specifically our hiring processes. So we've created an index called our Equal Hiring Index, which helps organizations understand where their processes have a lack of structure, where they have a degree of subjectivity, where certain vulnerable communities actually are not able to access systems or participate in the same way. And so we've really looked at it at a systemic level, but it really has to complement the work that's being done at the individual level.
Yeah, and I would
Marcel
add,
and Frank, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
if I may, I see two dimensions of this. One is in the hiring process, as Arthur described, but also is in the workplace. And both have to be dealt with very systematically.
So we have developed our own index, DEI pulse, where we really take the pulse of the employees and leadership. And the first step is to identify where the bias is, and then to come out with the different steps that you can take to really eliminate it. But if you don't know that it exists, there is a problem per se. So the first step is assessment.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Dolly here is asking, what do you recommend for the candidates to do to find out that the company's actions or pronouncements about inclusion are actually genuine, and how do candidates find out about that? Can you respond to this question, please, from Dolly?
Sure, I can take the first stab. First of all, I think it's important that candidates use discerning discretion around how they're equally interviewing employers as much as they're getting interviewed by employers. I think candidates are wary of almost the equivalent of greenwashing now for diversity washing. And we see this a lot because it's extremely easy for everyone to change their logos right now for Pride Month. How do we know that folks are actually invested in the LGBTQ community systemically and from a policy and a governance standpoint? So the first thing is to really ask, to request informational interviews with team members that you might be working with who are outside of the formal hiring process. Spend time, trying to research what the company has been doing in the community, what the company actually has listed on in their public materials, and most importantly, observing the formal and informal aspects of the hiring process, not just the formal communication you're receiving, but actually how you feel and how you're engaging in the process with everyone, because those are the most critical clues as to how you'll be treated once you're there. Marcella, Frank, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, another point that is very important is to look at actual data. One of the things we want to do with Arthur and Frank is to really push for standardized data, to have a DEI public index where we can really measure the level of DEI in all companies and really have it publicized. So it's not only what they're saying, but it's really what they are doing. And then employers can decide whether or not to join that company or to stay in that company. So we think it's very important, again, transparency, because a lot of companies pledge a lot of money to DEI, but then when you look at the board of directors or the C-suite composition or the support they give to their employees, is not there. So we need to really make sure there is real change.
Excellent. And I'm excited to hear that you're working on this index. I think there's going to be a lot more robust methodology coming out of the conversations we're having today. And it's great that you've presented your research here. Thank you so much. We are moving on.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I hope you stay around. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you,
Thank you.
Marcella, Arthur.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay,
All right.
bye.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.